In a bid to boost the Nigerian economy, the federal government has approved the implementation and conception of the Cassava Biomass bioethanol value chain project, which is a public-private partnership designed to operate on a design, build, operate, and transfer basis. According to the government, the project will kick off as a pilot program in the eastern region of Nigeria and will proceed to other regions of the country over the next 5 years. Federal government will provide 5 billion naira in grants, while the concessionaire will provide, or rather contribute 6.9 billion naira annually for 5 years. The Minister of State for Finance, Clem Agba, disclosed this after the Federal Executive Council meeting. Rice, according to a recent Jollof Index research, I think it's coming from SPM Intelligence, the average cost of making a pot of jollof rice for a Nigerian family of 5 has increased to its highest level in over 7 years, reflecting the country's rising cost of living across the board, from food to fuel. Cost of preparing a pot of the well-known Nigerian delicacy increased by 166% to 10,882 in March 2023 from 4,887 in July 2016 when the index was launched. And according to the report, remaining within a vicious cycle. Yes, it was from SPM Intelligence, an Africa-focused geopolitical research and strategic communications consulting firm. Kelvin Emmanuel, CEO of Hills Ltd. He's in the agriculture sector. He's in our Abuja studios right now to discuss this. Kelvin, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So we got lots of food, huh? We're going to start with, let's start with cassava. Let's do cassava before we go to rice. What do you make of this project from the federal government, this public-private partnership?
Good morning, Rotus. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I have questions more than I have answers for the federal government and the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning. Questions I have. If it's a design, build, operate, and transfer model, how many years is a concession? Did he go through ICRC? Did he go through Bureau of Public Procurement? Did he go through the needed regulatory checks? Why is the government giving a grant of 5 billion for a design, build, operate, and transfer? Where is it located in? And in the areas where it's located in, is it actually areas where those states have comparative advantage for cassava? And the reason is because cassava has a shelf life of 48 hours, because as soon as you harvest cassava, the cyanide in the root of cassava will poison the whole cassava within 48 hours if it's not either processed into dry flakes or processed into, through wet milling, into either ethanol or industrial starch or whatever other derivative you want to use it for. In this case, ethanol. And speaking of ethanol, you know, Rotus, Nigeria consumes about 400 million liters of ethanol every year. 1 liter of ethanol is somewhere around $1.27. So the annual demand of ethanol is valued about $508 million US on a yearly basis. And of this volume, Rotus, Nigeria does not produce up to 20%, which means about more than 80% of the ethanol used in Nigeria is actually imported. So you can see the effect of the Naira devaluation and depreciation, how it's impacted on increased cost of importing these B2B enterprise manufacturing products that are used for B2C manufacturing in different sectors of the economy. So the question I have is, why don't you leave this to the states? In areas, in states where they have comparative advantage, like Ogun State, like Oyo State, like Ondo State, like Ekiti, like Cross River, like Akwa Ibom, and a few states in the south, in the Niger Delta, Bayelsa, to River State, to actually focus, use their comparative advantage to do this, either design, build, operate, or transfer, or do like a public-private partnership through maybe a core investor sale where you bring a technical partner that will have an equity contribution in the project. For me, this is a more sustainable path to doing these PPPs than having the federal government give grants in a design, build, operate, transfer, and knowing fully well that Nigeria has a huge deficit of ethanol for different layers of B2C production in Nigeria.
Kelvin, over and over again, we continue to see this issue of low domestic production and high level of imports. We had a headline earlier in the year, earlier in the program, where sugar prices are 11-year high. We are import dependent on sugar. We have our sugar master plan, which started in 2012 or 2013. We're still not there yet. Maize, I mean, you can go across the chain of commodities as far as food items are concerned. And here you are, of course, giving us the stats on cassava. I think that I hope we have it. We have a list of food supply shocks, which the governor of the central bank talked about when he was talking about the rise in food inflation. He talked about, I think number one was the increase in road transportation costs, security issues in food producing areas, and then legacy infrastructure challenges. Kelvin, at what point do we put this behind us where over and over again, from sugar, cassava, every other food commodity, we continue to talk about this lack of domestic capacity to produce and this high level of imports? When do we get this sorted out? Can the next administration get that sorted out in your view?
Rotus, if they want to sort it out, let me tell you what they need to pay attention to. For example, Nigeria has the highest output of cassava in the world. It has 20% of the global market share for cassava at about 65 million metric tons per year. But cassava has stiff competition for use: gari, fufu, industrial starch, high quality cassava flour, ethanol. There's a stiff competition for it. So you need to get IITA and other government agencies to see that the variety of cassava that is planted by smallholder farmers is not the local variety that does 12 metric tons per hectare. Is the hybrid variety that does up to 25 metric tons per hectare. So that is on the primary side. On the secondary side, you have an issue of access to credit for companies who want to set up milling plants, from industrial starch to biograde ethanol to high quality cassava flour. You know, if you look at sugar also in a National Sugar Master Plan, you see that the issue is both in the primary and secondary layer, but more in the primary layer because you have an issue of the variety of sugarcane stock that is grown in Nigeria, which does about 79 metric tons per hectare compared to what you have in South America and in India that does about 180 metric tons per hectare. You also have an issue of using the backward integration levy for sugar that has generated nearly $1 billion to fund everything from irrigation for sugarcane plantations to equipment financing and other important areas. And the interesting thing is that if you focus and address the issues that we have with sugar deficit, the phase 1 to phase 4, 1.6 million metric tons of sugar Nigeria consumes every year, you're also going to solve the issue of ethanol. Because 1 metric ton of sugarcane can actually produce you 75 liters of ethanol. So these are the areas that the next administration, if they want to ensure that the focus on this B2B enterprise manufacturing layer, that's a bottleneck and that is a key to accelerated inflation on the demand pull side that we've seen over the last 8 years. These are the pain points they need to focus on. The problems are not extraordinary. It's just, in my opinion, a lack of political will and proper round pegs and round holes to tackle the issues from a policy angle.
Kelvin, finally, I want to ask you about, well, this jollof. We're going from one food item to the next now. Jollof rice, this from SBM Intelligence, making the headline of Business Day. Under the Buhari administration now, 7-year high or so. If you look at price points for food and the fact that the average Nigerian household or even individual, I think it's 50% of their income goes to food, the other 50% goes to transportation. What do you make of this? I mean, as far as the average Nigerian being able to survive and feed themselves.
The issue with rice, for example, is the issue of paddy. There is a lack of supply of the shortage of about 5 million metric tons, even with the progress that Nigeria has made with backward integration for rice. The shortage of about 5 million metric tons of paddy on a yearly basis. There is also the issue of the cost of groundnuts that is used to process groundnut oil on one side, the cost of soybean used to process soybean oil on the other side, that goes into the production of oil that is used for preparing jollof rice. There's also the issue of tomatoes and how the higher cost of transportation has impacted on the cost of tomatoes, and that goes into making puree for cooking jollof rice. So in my opinion, the issue has to be tackled from the roots, and the root is you have to increase the access to credit. You have to change. This goes back to the central bank and the direct intervention program through the Anchor Borrower program that the IMF says that has a loan impairment of 74%, and the CBN has disputed and said it only has a loan impairment of 48%, and how it gives credit. The need for the Development Finance Department at the central bank to change that model where it acts as an obligor so that it doesn't bear the risk, transfer it to a third party so that you can provide credit to these smallholder farmers to increase their production of rice paddy, and the millers we have enough milling capacity in Nigeria. In fact, there are some rice milling plants in Abuja, in the FCT here, that are struggling because there's a shortage of paddy to process. You know, in Kano, if you go to Kano, you see that there are over 30 industrial rice milling plants doing at least 100 metric tons of rice and processing on a daily basis. When I speak with the owners of these rice milling plants, the issue they always tell me, Kelvin, two things. Number one, the issue of the supply of paddy, shortage of it, which is a major bottleneck. And two, the issue of the cost of diesel, which I think we can address by focusing on a framework for compressed natural gas as a use alternative to diesel that is like 13% of the cost of diesel. So if the next administration wants to tackle the fact that rice, the cost of food, has actually eaten into the income of Nigerians up to 50%, and the national savings rate is very low, and the per capita income of Nigerians has dropped, it needs to focus on this pain point and buffers. If it tackles it, you see everything begin to fall back in line.
Kelvin Emmanuel, CEO, Dairy Hills, thank you so much for joining us to talk about cassava, sugar, rice, and everything else as far as food is concerned for the average Nigerian. We appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.